When I was living in Arizona, mangaves quickly became one of my favorite plants to grow outside. They're incredibly heat tolerant. They can take full sun, full heat in the crazy Arizona, Phoenix weather and still survive. I had them in pots, I had them in the ground, and they were just so low maintenance and beautiful. Naturally, when I moved to Utah, I couldn't leave them outside year round because they're only tolerate temperatures just below freezing. So I decided to bring them in. This one, the pot actually broke. I have had it in this little snappy pot container for months, but it's time it finally gets repotted. In case you're wondering, yes, this is a non-draining pot. This was one of the snappy organizers, not a snappy planter. The roots were just in there bare like this, and I would essentially just put like an inch of water in the bottom and let it go every 3 weeks or so. Obviously, it's not looking amazing down here, but I actually have new growth on top and this really funky kind of crested leaf. 3 leaves all in one. What I'm going to do now is rip off all of this dead stuff, as much of these dead leaves as I can, and then I'm going to pot it into this beautiful planter from Susan Ock. She is one of my favorite ceramic artists, and I think the colors of this will pair really nicely together. We'll have a nice analogous color scheme. So I'm going to start by pulling off these dead leaves so I can see what is healthy. And actually, overall, despite all the torture I put this plant through, it looks really good. I'm going to just cut off some of these lower leaves that are kind of dried out. And if I wanted to, I could go back and like, I don't know, kind of shape them. It really doesn't matter. Some people might be really bothered that I'm doing this, but the plant will be just fine. And it helps me keep everything just a little bit more tidy. So in Arizona, it's really common to see agaves where they've chopped off all of the lower leaves. A friend of mine, Andrea from Just Suck It, she calls it pineappling your agave. It's common in Southern California as well. But with that, they typically just cut like right off at the base. These, I mostly just want to cut off the dry spots. All right, now what to do with the roots. So the roots have actually been absorbing water, but most of them are very just dry and crispy. So I think I'm just gonna rip, might not be able to rip. They're pretty strong. Let's just cut them off. Now I'm leaving a little bit here on the end just so it has more that can sit down into the soil and keep it stable. But I'm also noticing a new little root growth there. And these look like they might have dried out, but those are also kind of new root growth. So I think once I get this in soil and start watering it every once in a while, it should start to root and continue to grow. Because the stem is so short, I'm gonna go ahead and fill the pot all the way up to the top. And then, I don't know if you can see or tell very well, but the roots are coming off, or the stem is kind of coming off at an angle. So I am actually gonna put the roots straight down and let the plant be a little bit crooked and hopefully kind of let it get itself upright again. So just kind of nestled it in there, push the soil around, and voila, it is all potted. And now I'm gonna go ahead and add some worm castings around the base. I feel like it will just help this have a really healthy soil environment and hopefully encourage some new growth a little bit faster. I don't need a lot, but I'm just gonna put a little sprinkle all around the sides. And now it is done. I'm gonna let this dry for a day. I don't wanna accidentally cause any sort of rot if those roots that are dead suddenly decide they want to reabsorb water. So I'm going to let it dry today and then I'll water it tomorrow and keep you posted. And then of course I am going to get it added to the succulent tracker app as well. Today I'm repotting this rippled jade or wavy jade. This is one of my favorite succulents to use in arrangements because the texture just fits in so nicely around other plants. It's a really good filler. Now this one hasn't been watered for a few days. It's probably been a couple weeks actually since I bought it, and it is definitely limp and in need of water, but I wanted to repot it first so that I can get it acclimated to the new soil. Now, whenever I am shopping for succulents in person, I always try to find a pot that is a good deal. I try and find one that has a lot of plants in it or that it's a really good specimen. I actually take quite a bit of time to pick out the individual plant I buy among all of the rows of a particular variety. The reason I actually bought this one is because in here it has a little wavy jade leaf baby. That might not seem like a big deal to you, but this one is a plant that can propagate from leaves, but I've had a really hard time propagating it from a leaf. And so having that little leaf baby in there, I thought was a super fun way to get a little taste of propagating it from a leaf, and I'll eventually take some leaves from it myself and try propagating those again. But I just thought that'd be fun to say, okay, this one grew completely from a leaf. So that's why I got this one. It was a nice healthy plant, good stem, good foliage, and the cute little leaf baby. So now let's get it potted up. First, I'm gonna hold it over this bin of soil. This is soil from nursery pots. So it's not the soil that I like to use for succulents. I tend to like using a really gritty soil mix, but I still keep the soil that comes from the nursery pots. That way I can reuse them for other plants or sometimes mix it in if I have a succulent that needs a bit more water than typical. Now, wavy jade is a plant that I would say needs a little bit more water than most succulents, but you still want to make sure it's in something really well draining. This root ball is super, super dry, really compact and hard. So I wouldn't be surprised if it actually got a little bit underwatered at the nursery just because the water would probably repel off of this soil. I bet the soil had a hard time getting soaked all the way through. Even still, the roots are looking really healthy, and this leaf baby, oh no, the leaf baby just fell. Or I guess pulled. Oh, no, it didn't. I thought it got pulled off of the leaf, but it just has a little bit of a stem. Just kidding. It did come all the way off the leaf. Sad day. It does have some roots though, so I'm hoping I can just transplant it and it'll survive. No, it does not have very many roots. Oh, sad. This is why you have to be so gentle if you're trying to keep little babies like this. But if it doesn't work out, I can reuse this leaf. It should likely grow again. And then I don't know if you noticed another one fell off earlier. So I'll keep all of these and try propagating them still. Now I'm going to get off as much of the original soil as possible. That way, once it goes into the gritty mix, the roots are right there in the gritty mix. They're not covered in too much organic soil, and they'll be more likely to just absorb that water around them. The roots on this one do look really healthy, so that's a good sign as well. Sometimes if you're buying succulents at a nursery that doesn't know how to care for succulents, the roots will end up being rotted. So when you go to repot it, you'll get really mushy black roots that aren't really healthy for your succulent. In that case, you can actually rip the roots off and even cut off part of the base of the succulent to try and get rid of any area that's rotted. Let it dry out and then plant it, and it'll eventually grow new roots. But in this case, these roots look really good, so we're just going to go ahead and pot it up. I am really curious to see if this will survive. I have a little 1-inch snappy pot that I'm going to stick it into in some coconut coir and just see what happens. All right, I've got my bin of soil. I'm going to put soil partway into this pot, and then I'll hold the succulent in place and then fill soil in around it. Now the stem on this is going to get buried somewhat into the soil. I don't want it to go too deep, as I find if the stem is really deep into the soil, a lot of times it'll end up rotting, but I'm probably gonna have to cover it to about here just to keep it stable. I found that some people, when they are planting in Bonsai Jack's gritty mix, they feel like the succulents don't stay in place as well. Part of that is because the soil is just looser, and so your plant is a little bit more likely to wiggle and move around. If that's the case though, what I recommend is actually piling soil up a little bit higher than normal and then just pressing it down and making sure that there's no air pockets in there. And that will usually help keep things in place a bit better. Okay, so I'm gonna put some coconut coir into this tiny little 1-inch pot. And then I'm gonna get it slightly wet. I don't normally recommend working with wet soil, but in the case of coconut coir, it tends to be tricky to work with when it's dry. And this plant is so small, it's not gonna be problematic for it to be a little bit wet when I'm planting. All right, so there we have that. And then I'm just gonna try and set this in gently. I'm gonna try and cover the base with a little bit more soil also, just to try and help it really stay stuck in here. Hopefully put off some more roots and then just keep growing. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and water just a smidge. Oh, that water does not wanna stay in there. There we go. All right, so we'll see if that survives, but I really hope it does. Now, this was already in the Succulent Tracker app. I put it in when I bought it, but I am going to add a new photo of it. And then I'm also gonna record that I repotted it. I mentioned at the beginning that the plant was a little bit underwatered and these leaves were super limp. If I kind of do that taco test, you can see that they're bending really easily. By the way, I really want to know who came up with the name taco test because it's such a good name. With Ripple Jade and planting it in this gritty mix when it's underwatered, I'm going to water this every 3 to 4 days for about 2 weeks to give it a little boost, help it root and get established more quickly. And then I will go back to the typical soak and dry method and then checking to see if the leaves are firm. If they're firm, I would wait to water. If they are starting to bend like this, then that's a sign it's time to water. So if you have been planting in Jack's Gritty Mix and you feel like your plants just kind of dehydrate a little bit after you plant in it, that is very normal. And you can follow this same process, watering every 3 to 4 days for about 2 weeks right after you replant it to help it get more established. For something like Ripple Jade, you're not going to run into problems because this one can tolerate water more frequently than most succulents. If you have an Echeveria, especially one that is known to be very finicky or particular, I would probably water every 5 to 6 days, maybe even once a week, just for the first couple weeks, and not do it quite so frequently because you don't want to end up with a rotted succulent. Again, that's mostly if you notice that once you plant into the gritty mix that your succulents tend to kind of shrink a little bit, lose some water, and have a hard time adjusting. In the long run though, Jack's Gritty Mix is a really great option for indoor succulents, especially if you tend to overwater your succulents. It dries out so quickly that it is difficult. It's not impossible, but it is more difficult to overwater a succulent in Jack's Gritty Mix than in a traditional potting soil. These will both go onto my plant shelves where they will get light from grow lights for about 12 hours a day. And then these two little leaves are going to go onto my propagation tray and we'll see if I can get some new babies from them. So this is a Haworthia limifolia twister. And I've seen limifolia before and I thought they were cool. They just have this really unique kind of lines and ridges along the leaves. But this one has a spiral, so it reminds me of the spiral aloe, which is incredibly hard to grow and super expensive. This one was, I think, $5 or $6, so not too bad. And it looks like it's in good health. I want to show you what the roots look like because they're not terrible, but they're also not great. So you can see a lot of roots here and they are white, but they are actually really deflated and they're almost going a little bit gray. They're not really gray, but they're kind of just dull. They're not very vibrant and glossy. Now you might be thinking, well, Cassidy, they're covered in dirt. Of course, they're not vibrant and glossy, However, I'm going to show you in just a second once I get these roots cleaned off. I want to show you some on some other Haworthia that I just pulled the soil off of and compared the two and see if you can see the difference. Whenever you have a problem with a succulent and you can't quite pinpoint it right away, a lot of times it's going to require you to uproot your succulent and look at the roots and see what they look like. So here we have two Haworthia. Now, the reason why I'm comparing a Haworthia to a Haworthia or Haworthiopsis is because they have much thicker roots than other succulents. And so if I were to compare this to an Echeveria, the roots should still have a similar like overall look, but the Haworthia roots are going to be much thicker. So you can see here, these are very thick, very round, and they're very bright, kind of cream colored. And I don't know how much of this is going to come up just through the video, but they have a bit of a sheen to them. They're a little bit more glossy, and they just look happier, thicker, plumper, and firm. They're very firm. These roots, on the other hand, are kind of dull. And like I said, you can see they're kind of turning gray. They don't look very plump. Despite being large, they look like they've been crushed and deflated. So they're not dead, but they're also not the healthiest that roots could be. So I'm going to repot this. I'm going to cut off a few of these roots at the bottom. I'm going to repot this in a gritty mix, and it will start to get a lot better. However, if over the next few weeks I notice that this is not staying plump or I start to have problems with it, I will definitely pull this up again because it's likely that the roots have actually died because they were a little bit underwatered to begin with. So I could have watered this when I got it, and that definitely could have helped these to plump up before repotting, and maybe that would have been the only thing that they needed. However, I have a feeling that these being in that really organic, very compact soil wouldn't have done super well long-term anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and pot them up in the gritty mix, and then we'll see what happens over the next few weeks. Today, I am going to be repotting this Peperomia watermelon. And actually, this is a little bit deceiving because it looks like it's in this really cool pot, but it's not. It's just in its original nursery pot right now. Now, something interesting about Peperomia watermelon is that Peperomia are technically one of the succulent species, but it's also one that kind of gets grouped into traditional houseplants as well. But you'll find that unlike some other houseplants, this is a pretty drought-tolerant succulent, and so you can go longer between watering. It doesn't need direct light to stay compact and looking nice, but it does still need quite a bit of bright, indirect light. Overall, it's a pretty great houseplant for beginners. I'm going to be repotting it into this really cool planter. I actually bought the design from a designer on Etsy, Terra de Verdant, and they sell these pots, but you can also buy the 3D print files, and that's what I did. So I bought the 3D print file. I used some filament that I already had that I really think matches well. It matches those red stems, and it's going to be a great fit for this plant. You'll notice it's just a little bit larger than the nursery pot it's in. I want to keep it nice and compact like this, and I'm not particularly worried about it growing a lot. I'm happy to keep it kind of small and trailing over the edge. But I liked the way that the waves on this planter mimic the waves in the leaves. And since it's Peperomia watermelon, I liked the red and green contrast. As usual, I'm going to have a bin to unpot the plant into, and I'm going to remove as much of this original soil as I can. This soil is actually still pretty damp, despite the fact that I haven't watered it in just over a week since I bought it. I am going to try and loosen up this root ball so that the roots will spread and continue to grow as it's repotted. Even though this is a succulent, it's one that can handle water a bit more frequently than most other succulents. I have watched a number of videos and done some research, and you can propagate these from leaves. It takes a few months for them to root and start growing, but I am going to save a couple of these leaves and try propagating them. I'm going to plant this in a combination of the original soil that it came in, but also combine it with some of Jack's gritty mix to make the soil a little bit chunkier and allow it to drain a bit better. All right, so I got a little bit of soil in the bottom, and I'm gonna just kind of hold this in place. I'm gonna put a little layer of gritty mix and then a little layer of the organic mix. All right, this is all potted up and ready to go. It's going to be on my plant stand with the rest of my succulents and other plants. It'll get about 12 hours of grow lights per day. And I'm gonna put it on the bottom shelf where the grow lights are about 18 inches from the base of the shelf. So it'll be about 8 to 10 inches above the top of this plant, which should be very similar to indirect sunlight. If you have this plant and you don't have grow lights, it would work really well on a south-facing windowsill or somewhere that gets really bright indirect light all day long. Thank you so much for watching. If there's anything you'd like to see me cover on the channel, be sure to leave a comment and let me know. And of course, if you liked it, be sure to give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and share it with all of your succulent loving friends. And I will see you next time.